The morning sun cast long shadows across Crystal Lake. As Michael Thompson sat peacefully on his weathered wooden dock, coffee mug in hand, watching the water gently lap against the posts. He'd inherited this lakefront property from his grandfather 3 years ago, and these quiet moments had become his sanctuary. The old cabin behind him might need work, but this view was priceless. That tranquility shattered when Karen Whitmore's voice cut through the morning air like a rusty blade. "Excuse me, you can't be here." Michael turned to see a woman in her late 40s marching down the wooden walkway, her orange blazer practically glowing in the morning light. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features into a permanent scowl. Behind her trailed the other residents, looking uncomfortable, but following nonetheless. "I'm sorry." Michael stood slowly, setting his coffee on the dock railing. "This is private property belonging to the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association," Karen announced, planting herself at the foot of his dock with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm Karen Whitmore, HOA president, and you're trespassing." Michael blinked, genuinely confused. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is my property. I live right there." He gestured toward the cabin nestled among the pine trees. Karen's laugh was sharp and humorless. "That old eyesore, even if you do live there, which I doubt. This dock and the waterfront access belong to our community. We've been using this trail and dock for 15 years. "Well, you've been using my property for 15 years then," Michael replied calmly, though his jaw was beginning to tighten. "My grandfather built this dock in 1987. Your grandfather," one of Karen's companions, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, stepped forward nervously. "Are you talking about old Henry Thompson?" "Yes. Henry was my grandfather." The man's face went pale. "Karen, maybe we should..." "Should what, Bob?" Karen snapped. "Let some stranger make false claims about our community property? I don't think so." She turned back to Michael, her voice rising. "I don't care what story you're spinning. This dock serves our community, and our residents have established usage rights. You need to leave now." Michael felt his grandfather's calm demeanor settling over him like a familiar coat. Henry Thompson had taught him that quiet strength spoke louder than raised voices. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my property, my dock, and my lakefront access." "We'll see about that," Karen hissed, pulling out her phone. "Bob, call the police. Tell them we have a trespasser who's become hostile and refusing to leave community property." "Karen, I really don't think," Bob started. "Call them." As Bob reluctantly dialed, the third member of their group, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, whispered, "I remember Henry. He was always so nice to the kids when they played near the water." "That's ancient history, Linda," Karen snapped. "What matters is current property rights and community access. This person is disrupting our peaceful enjoyment of the lake." Michael watched this exchange with growing amazement. What would you have done in his position? Here was a woman so convinced of her authority that she was calling the police on him for using his own property. The irony might have been amusing if it weren't so maddening. "Mom," he said quietly, "I really think you should reconsider this course of action." "Are you threatening me?" Karen's eyes lit up with vindictive satisfaction. "Bob, tell the police the trespasser is making threats now." "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm just suggesting that calling the police might not work out the way you're expecting." But Karen was beyond reason now, pacing the dock like a general preparing for battle. "Do you know how much money our HOA has spent maintaining this trail and dock access? Do you have any idea how many community events we've held here? 15 years of established use creates rights, whether you like it or not." Michael could have explained about adverse possession law, about how it required hostile, continuous, and exclusive use without the owner's permission. He could have mentioned that his grandfather had simply been too kind to kick people off his property. Instead, he said nothing and waited. The sound of police sirens began echoing across the lake, growing closer by the second. Karen's smile turned triumphant. "Here comes reality," she said smugly. "I hope you've enjoyed your little power trip, because it's about to end." But as Michael watched the police cars pulling up to the trailhead, he couldn't help but smile. Karen Whitmore was about to learn that sometimes reality has a way of surprising everyone involved. Officer Martinez stepped onto the dock with the measured pace of someone who'd handled countless property disputes. His partner, Officer Chen, remained at the trailhead, speaking quietly into her radio. The morning had turned from peaceful to chaotic in minutes, with curious neighbors now gathering along the shoreline to watch the drama unfold. "Good morning, folks," Martinez said, his voice carrying the practiced calm of a veteran officer. "I'm Officer Martinez. Someone called about a trespassing situation." Karen immediately stepped forward, her earlier confidence blazing like a beacon. "Yes, officer. I'm Karen Whitmore, president of the Sunset Ridge HOA." She gestured dramatically toward Michael. "This individual is trespassing on community property and became belligerent when asked to leave." Martinez nodded, making notes. "And you are?" he asked Michael. "Michael Thompson. I own this property." "He claims to own it," Karen interjected quickly. "But this dock and waterfront access have been part of our community for 15 years. We maintain it. We use it for community gatherings. And we have established rights here." Officer Martinez surveyed the scene, the weathered dock, the well-worn trail leading up to Michael's cabin, the clear demarcation where the manicured HOA properties began further up the hill. "Do either of you have documentation of ownership?" "Of course," Michael said, pulling out his phone. "I could show you the property tax records, the deed transfer from my grandfather's estate, and the survey markers." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Anyone can fake documents on their phone, officer. What matters here is practical reality. Our community has invested thousands of dollars in maintaining this access point. We've held summer barbecues here, children's fishing events, water safety classes. This is clearly community property." Bob shifted uncomfortably behind her. "Karen, maybe we should check our own property records before. Our records are clear, Bob," she snapped, never taking her eyes off the officer. 15 years of continuous community use establishes our rights regardless of whatever paperwork this person claims to have. Officer Martinez turned to Michael. "Sir, when did you acquire this property?" "I inherited it 3 years ago when my grandfather passed." "Henry Thompson owned this land for over 40 years. Henry Thompson, Martinez's." Eyebrows rose slightly. Tall gentleman, always wore that old fishing hat. "You knew him?" "He used to let me and my brothers fish off this dock when we were kids." "Good man." The officer's expression softened momentarily before returning to professional neutrality. "But that doesn't resolve the current dispute." Karen sensed an opening. "You see, even you recognize this as a community fishing spot. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Established community use." "With my grandfather's permission," Michael added quietly. "Alleged permission," Karen countered. "Where's the documentation of that permission? Where are the signed agreements? You can't just claim someone gave blanket permission for community use without proof." Martinez looked between them. "This seems like it might be a civil property matter rather than a criminal trespass issue. I'd recommend you both consult with your attorneys and..." "No." Karen's voice rose sharply. "Officer, I need this person removed from our community property immediately. As HOA president, I have the authority to make this request on behalf of our homeowners. We cannot have random people claiming they own our common areas. The gathering crowd murmured their agreement. Michael realized he was facing more than just Karen's delusion. He was up against an entire community that had convinced itself of a convenient fiction. What would you have done? Stand there and argue with a crowd of people who built their entire lake access around using your property without permission? Michael chose a different approach. Officer Martinez, he said calmly, I understand this is confusing, but I have something that might help clarify the situation. He pulled out a folder from his cabin. These are the original survey documents from when my grandfather first bought this land in 1981. Karen laughed derisively. More fake documents. Officer, how long are we going to entertain this charade? But as Michael spread out the official survey map, showing property lines that clearly encompass not just the dock, but the entire trail leading up to the whole development, something interesting happened. Bob's face went completely white. Karen, Bob whispered urgently, I think we might want to call our attorney before this goes any further. Why would we need an attorney? We're the victims here. Because, Bob said quietly, pointing at the survey map, if this is accurate, then our community trail, the one we all use to get to the lake. Officer Martinez studied the documents, his expression growing more serious. Mom, these appear to be legitimate county survey records. And if I'm reading this correctly, Karen's confident smile began to falter as she saw the look of dawning realization on everyone's faces. The crowd's murmur changed tone, shifting from supportive to concerned. What? She demanded. What are you all looking at? But even as she asked the question, Karen Whitmore was about to discover that her war against Michael Thompson had been built on a foundation far shakier than she'd ever imagined. The silence that followed Officer Martinez's examination of the survey documents was deafening. Even the lapping of waves against the dock seemed to pause, as the reality of the situation began to dawn on everyone present. Karen's face cycled through confusion, denial, and the first flickers of panic as she watched her carefully constructed authority crumble in real time. Officer, she said, her voice losing its earlier conviction, surely you're not going to base a legal decision on some old papers this person happened to produce. Martinez looked up from the documents, his expression grave. Ma'am, these aren't just old papers. These are official county survey records, recorded and notarized. And according to these documents, he paused, double-checking the measurements. Mr. Thompson's property doesn't just include this dock and the immediate waterfront. Michael watched as Bob's face grew even paler, the thin man clearly understanding something the others hadn't grasped yet. What does that mean exactly? Linda asked nervously. Officer Martinez traced his finger along the survey lines. It means this entire trail you all use to access the lake, from the main road down to the water, runs through Mr. Thompson's property. The crowd's murmur turned into worried chatter. Several residents began pulling out their phones, frantically calling spouses and attorneys. Karen, however, stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape. That's impossible, she whispered. We've been using that trail for 15 years. Our home maintains it. We pay for gravel. We clear the brush. We installed those safety railings last summer, all on my property, Michael said quietly, and I appreciate the maintenance. By the way, Grandfather always said the community took good care of his land. Bob cleared his throat nervously. Karen, remember when we first moved here, how the developer mentioned that the lake access was grandfathered in, and we shouldn't worry about the details. Karen whirled on him. That's completely different. That means we have historical rights. Actually, Michael said, reaching into his folder again. It means my grandfather was kind enough to let the developer sell lots with lake access, even though he owned the only practical path to the water. Officer Martinez studied the new document Michael produced. This appears to be correspondence between your grandfather and the original developer, dated 1996. Michael nodded. Grandfather agreed to allow the trail to remain open as long as the community respected the property and understood it was a privilege, not a right. He never charged them anything, never asked for compensation for maintenance, never restricted access. See, Karen said triumphantly, that proves we have established rights. It proves you had permission, Michael corrected, permission that died with my grandfather and was never transferred to me. The implication hit Karen like a physical blow. Her knees actually buckled slightly before she caught herself. You're saying you could close the trail. I'm saying this is my property, and I get to decide who uses it. What would you have done? At this point, Michael had every legal right to be angry, to kick everyone off his land immediately. Instead, he watched Karen's world reshape itself around this new reality with something approaching sympathy. But Karen wasn't finished fighting. This is extortion, she declared, her voice rising to near hysteria. You're trying to hold our entire community hostage, officer. Surely there are laws against this kind of manipulation. Ma'am, a property owner has the right to control access to their land, Martinez said gently. If there was an informal agreement with the previous owner that wasn't legally documented, but we've invested so much money, Karen wailed. The trail improvements, the dock maintenance, the community events. We can't lose our lake access now. You haven't lost anything yet, Michael said. I'm not my grandfather, but I'm not unreasonable either. Karen's head snapped up, hope flickering in her eyes. What do you mean? I mean, maybe we can work something out. Some kind of formal agreement that protects everyone's interests. The crowd began to murmur hopefully, but Karen's expression had turned calculating. Michael could practically see the wheels turning in her head. A formal agreement. She repeated slowly, You mean like an easement? Something we'd have to pay for? I'm open to reasonable arrangements. How much? Karen asked bluntly. How much? Money do you want to extort from our community? The word extort hung in the air like a challenge. Officer Martinez shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that the situation was moving beyond a simple property dispute into something more complex. I never said anything about money. Michael replied calmly. Then what do you want? Michael looked, brown at the worried faces, at the community that had unknowingly built their entire lake lifestyle around his generosity. What he said next would determine whether this ended in negotiation or warfare. I want the same thing my grandfather wanted. Respect for the property and recognition that lake access is a privilege, not a right. Karen's eyes narrowed dangerously. And if we don't agree to your terms, Michael's answer was simple, devastating, and completely within his legal rights. But before he could respond, Officer Chen approached from the trailhead, holding a stack of papers and wearing an expression that suggested the day was about to get even more interesting. Officer Martinez, she called out, You need to see what I found at the county recorder's office. Officer Chen's arrival sent a ripple of tension through the gathered crowd. Karen's face had already begun showing cracks in her confidence, but something about Chen's expression suggested the situation was about to shift dramatically once again. What did you find? Martinez asked, accepting the stack of papers from his partner. I ran a complete property search on this area after seeing those survey documents, Chen explained. And it turns out Mr. Thompson's grandfather owned significantly more land than anyone realized. Michael felt a familiar knot in his stomach. He'd been so focused on the immediate property dispute that he hadn't fully investigated all of his grandfather's holdings. Henry Thompson had been a quiet man who rarely discussed business, even with family. Chen spread out a larger surveyor's map on the dock railing. According to county records, Henry Thompson didn't just own the trail and waterfront access. He owned her finger traced across the map, following property lines that seemed to encompass far more than anyone had imagined. He owned the land under approximately 60% of the Sunset Ridge development. The silence that followed was profound. Karen's face went through several color changes, settling on a shade of gray that matched the dock's weathered wood. Bob actually sat down heavily on a piling, his head in his hands. "I don't understand," Linda whispered. "Our lots, our houses, are built on land that was apparently leased from Mr. Thompson's grandfather through the original developer." Chen continued. "Long-term ground leases that transferred to the individual homeowners. But here's the interesting part. Several of those leases contain clauses allowing the original landowner or his heirs to reclaim the property under specific circumstances." Michael stared at the documents, finally understanding why his grandfather had always seemed so amused when neighbors complained about HOA rules and regulations. Henry Thompson hadn't just been tolerating the community's use of his trail. He'd been the secret landlord for half their neighborhood. Karen found her voice first, though it came out as barely more than a croak. "What specific circumstances, officer?" Chen consulted the lease documents. "Failure to maintain the property according to community standards. Legal disputes with the landowner regarding access rights," or she paused, checking the language carefully. "Harassment of the landowner or his family members." The implication hit everyone simultaneously. Karen had not only called the police on her secret landlord, she'd done so while standing on his property and demanding he be arrested for trespassing on his own land. "This can't be happening," Karen whispered. Michael was still processing the revelation himself. "What would you have done, suddenly discovering you had this kind of leverage over people who just treated you like a criminal?" The temptation for revenge would be overwhelming for most people. But as he looked around at the worried faces, Linda, who remembered his grandfather fondly, Bob, who tried to warn Karen against escalating the situation, even some of the other residents who had simply been following their HOA president's lead, Michael realized that revenge wasn't what his grandfather would have wanted. "Karen," he said quietly, "I think we need to have a very different conversation now." She nodded. Mutely, her earlier bluster completely deflated. "Officer Martinez, I don't want to press any charges or pursue legal action at this time. This seems to be a misunderstanding that got out of hand." Martinez nodded. "Are you sure?" "Given the circumstances, I'm sure, but I would like some time to review all these documents and understand exactly what my grandfather's arrangements were with the community." As the police officers gathered their paperwork and prepared to leave, Karen finally found her voice again. "Michael, Mr. Thompson, what happens now?" Michael looked out over the lake, remembering countless mornings spent here with his grandfather, learning about patience, kindness, and the difference between power and wisdom. "Now we figure out how to move forward in a way that honors what my grandfather built here," he said. He wanted this to be a place where families could enjoy the lake. That doesn't have to change. But the leases, the harassment clause, will remain in effect, Michael said firmly. "But I'm not interested in displacing anyone who's willing to be reasonable and respectful going forward." Karen's relief was palpable, but she wasn't quite ready to let go of her authority entirely. As HOA president, I'll need to review any new agreements with our attorney before. Karen, Bob interrupted gently. Maybe it's time to let someone else handle the negotiations. For the first time that morning, Karen Whitmore looked truly defeated. The realization that she'd not only lost this battle, but had potentially jeopardized the entire community's future, was finally sinking in Dot as the crowd began to disperse. People approached Michael individually to apologize and express their concerns about the future. Most were genuinely remorseful about the misunderstanding and grateful for his reasonable response. Linda lingered after the others had left. Your grandfather was proud of you, you know, she said softly. He used to talk about his grandson, who was learning to be patient and thoughtful, just like him. Michael smiled, feeling Henry Thompson's presence in the morning breeze across the lake. He was a good teacher. Later that evening, as Michael sat on his dock watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and amber, he reflected on the day's events. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and negotiations, formal agreements and boundary disputes. But tonight, the lake was peaceful again, and the community that had unknowingly depended on his family's generosity for so long would have the chance to do so openly and gratefully. Karen Whitmore, meanwhile, was having a very different kind of evening, fielding phone calls from angry neighbors and preparing her resignation letter as HOA president. Sometimes, Michael thought, the truth has a way of reshaping everything, including the people who try to fight against it. The lake lapped gently against the dock his grandfather had built, and all was well. If you're still here, I'd really like to know what this reminded you of or what you would have done in my place. And hey, if this story hits something in you and you want to support the channel, that little thanks button's always there. Thanks for hanging out. We're HOA Confessionals Stories, and this is just one of many unbelievable tales. Catch more by checking out the next video. We promise it's even wilder.